Hello, everyone, and welcome to Practitioners Unplugged podcast, where we dive into real-world stories and strategies of manufacturing digital transformation. Join us as we hear from thought leaders and innovators who are driving change and shaping the future of Industry 4.0. Whether you're a seasoned professional or just curious about the future of manufacturing, this podcast is for you. Today on episode 7, we are diving into the concept of universal automation and its pivotal role in the future of automation and interoperability. To help us uncover the whys behind this transformational shift, we have Brett Redmond, Head of Product Management for EcoStruxure Automation Expert at Schneider Electric. Brett will share his insights on how universal automation is shaping the industry and what it means for the future of seamless integration and innovation. Join us as we explore Schneider Electric's answer to universal automation and its impact on the world of industrial automation. Brett, welcome to the podcast. Can you spend a couple minutes just introducing yourself, a little bit about your history, what you're doing today?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So just a bit of background for myself. I've been a part of the industrial automation industry for almost 15 years now. So started with Inventus and then, came over through the merge with Schneider Electric and have a lot of background in DCS, but also discrete, continuous, hybrid markets as well. Started as a nuclear engineer and then I've transformed a bit with some help from my MBA into more of a product management role for EcoStruxure Automation Expert, which is our, implementation of the universal automation shared source runtime and what we're trying to get to with the future for industrial automation.
Great. Brett, glad you could join us. Maybe I can start. This topic is a little bit outside of my comfort zone, so maybe we can get into a few of the basic questions and then, dive down into the details. In terms of introduction, for those who don't know anything about universal automation, maybe you can say a few words about it.
Yeah, so I guess before I go into that, right, I want everyone to be clear that I am not part of universal automation, right? So universal automation is their own organization, separately run organization that Schneider Electric is a member of and currently a content provider. But that in the future is going to go away as well, right? So we are just a member in universal automation and what they're trying to do. Obviously, we share the benefits and the capabilities that universal automation brings, but I want to make sure I'm not a representative for universal automation. So the answers here are coming from Schneider Electric, not universal automation. Universal automation, right? You can really think about it in a very simple term. It's a software ecosystem, a control ecosystem that we're trying to create in the industry. And, we've had some attempts in the past to do this with some shared, standards and capabilities to be able to standardize across multiple different vendors and create this ecosystem of interoperability that hasn't really worked, right? When you look at a standard and try to standardize that standard across different vendors, there's a lot of different implementation strategies that are taken. It creates a lot of hassle and things that don't go right when the actual end user gets to play with it. What we're trying to do with what universal automation is trying to do is create this shared open ecosystem based on a shared source runtime, which is a key differentiator than what has been done in the past, right? So that shared source runtime is a piece of open source code that is being provided to the members of universal automation to be able to create that interoperability at the foundational layer so that there isn't any sort of interoperability issues or implementation changes from vendor to vendor to create that kind of, issues when you get to the actual end user consumption.
Got it. So, there's a lot of good intentions around interoperability. Everybody wants that. But intent always doesn't translate to, execution and, doing it. So for those, let's say, outside of, let's say the non-technical folks, let's say in operations, what can we do? Because I feel like, this is not a new topic, right? And the status quo has a lot of inertia around it. So what can let's say operations leaders do? What are the things they should stop doing and start doing other things to help accelerate, this effort?
Yeah, so I think we might be getting a bit ahead here, but the biggest thing that I see for universal automation is built for the end user, right? This is really to put power and flexibility back into the end user's hands, right? And not to get locked into these completely vendor, locked systems, and being able to pick and choose hardware platforms that make the most sense for them, give them scalability, capabilities, and be able to reduce any sort of lead time issues that they have with hardware. So everything about universal automation goes back to what the users are looking for in the market. And, to really kind of push it forward, if you're talking to a COO or a CEO or one of these, different personas, as an end user, you need to put your foot down with the vendors, right? You can have a great concept of this open, interoperable, shared source runtime, but if the vendors don't adopt that runtime and start implementing actual platforms in the market, the end users won't be able to pick and choose what they want to do. And I think that's kind of the challenge that we're facing with universal automation right now, is that we need some big end users to really put their foot down and look at their RFQs and look at their requirements documents and specify that they want these open interoperable systems to be able to push the vendors to create more of these shared source runtime offerings, these universal automation offerings, to give them that availability of those hardware platforms that they need to be able to drive this open interoperable system based on 1499 into the market.
So just to be sure, I mean, you're defining interoperability as decoupling hardware from software. Like, how are you defining interoperability? Because I feel like that's a buzzword.
Yeah. So interoperability, right? You said it. It's this decoupling of the software layer from the hardware layer, right? So with this shared source runtime, this runtime code will be running on a variety of different hardware platforms. It can run on switches, it can run on PLCs, it can run on IPCs and server class stations. So it's this software layer that is completely agnostic from what we're doing at the hardware layer to be able to provide that same software, interoperability configuration environment with the engineering, really kind of just decoupling the control layer from the underlying control hardware.
So no longer like dedicated PLC to dedicated IO or dedicated DCS to dedicated DCS IO?
Correct. Yeah. So I guess there's a lot of confusion in the market on this point, right? Because when you talk about decoupling hardware from software, first thing that's going to come to people's mind is containerization and virtual PLCs, right? That's pretty standard. We have a lot of competitors that are moving in that direction. Schneider also, we have the soft depack with the decoupled, containerized runtime as well. But this is different, right? What we're doing with 1499 and what universal automation is doing is really having a separate layer of agnostic capabilities on the control to the hardware. So even if you have a virtual PLC, you're still configuring that PLC, right? You're configuring that piece of hardware, for example, even if it is virtualized and in a container. Whereas where you have 1499 and what we're doing with universal automation is now you're configuring a system and assets. So you're not even worried about the hardware. You can configure your whole plants without thinking about what hardware that you actually wanted to run it on. And that gives a lot of power and flexibility to be able to configure all these assets and this reusability concept that we'll go into probably here in a bit. But really it changes the whole game about how you think about programming a automation plan.
So, all right, that's interesting. But what are the key differentiations over traditional, PLCs? So you had mentioned that this is more asset level and less programming. What does that look like? Other than the decoupleization, but you're saying you're taking these asset template. What does that mean versus traditional PLCs?
Yeah. So when you configure a traditional PLC, right, you configure that PLC for whatever logic that you want to run in that portion of the plant. And it's usually very geographically located, right? So this PLC will take this part of the plant, this PLC will take this part, and you configure those PLCs. Now you're working on with kind of an asset-based, object-oriented framework, right? So instead of configuring part of the plant, you're going to configure all your pumps, right? So usually there's a lot of standardization within a plant on the pumps or the heaters or whatever control asset that you have. So you can configure an asset template for that pump, right? And once you configure it once, you have this pump, we call it a CAT. You can essentially copy and paste and use that CAT as you fit throughout the plant as you go through and configure your different objects. So you talk about starting the engineering process. Instead of going and looking at a PLC and going down and configuring it, you're configuring all your assets, and then it's essentially a copy and paste, connect the dots, low code, no code engineering environment that gives you a lot of flexibility in how you engineer that system.
So that's an interesting point. So what's the other, like, how do you do interlockings and data transfer between PLCs and SCADAs, like the tagging and all that other stuff? So I'm dropping blocks, but like, what's the functionality in between each asset control aspect?
Yeah, so it's all done automatically. So it's all done behind the scenes in an automated kind of way. So say you have a pump and you have some other asset that you're transferring data back and forth in. You create that pump, you create that interlock there, right? And you can even map them to two different PLCs, right? So you can say, okay, PLC A is going to take this pump, PLC B is going to take this interlock, and then all that cross information is going to be done automatically. And you can even change it as it goes on, right? So now say something's wrong with that PLC that's running the interlock. We have a maintenance issue. Let's move that interlock to another PLC, and all that is done automatically to handle that kind of transfer of data and the communication back and forth between the hardware devices. So again, the user doesn't have to worry about the hardware at all anymore. It's all about the assets. It's all about distributing that control and making sure that you are running the control where it makes the most sense for the customer.
That's an interesting point, right? So I think of, let's say I'm doing plant level upgrades. And I have to pull everything down. I want to change a PLC out. I want to change some IO infrastructure. What you're essentially saying is that you can you can move that code and shift if you're working on like a part of that line, as opposed to the entire line having to go out to make those changes. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. So it's simple as, dragging and dropping your control and remapping and deploying, right? So there's really nothing to it. It really is as simple as it sounds. And there's a lot of power there, right? And it kind of goes into this whole concept of scalability too. And we see it with a lot of customers, right? Once you have a plant designed and operating, if you want to add a line to your plant, it's not easy to do that, right? Because of the, creating those, data connection points between the pre-existing PLCs, going in and all that code that was defined previously in those PLCs, if you want to change, it's very, very challenging. Whereas with this kind of system-based approach that you have with 1499 and the asset-based, it's as simple as copy and pasting a line and deploying it to a new PLC or deploying it to the same PLC, right? And just redeploying it. So it really gives a lot of power. And when we have some of these changing market demands for a lot of our customers, right? Demand goes up and down. You can look at COVID, right? Where some markets went through the roof from a demand standpoint. They need to really change their operational output. And then there's some that really needed to scale down. And being able to kind of leverage this asset-based approach gives a lot of flexibility to the end users to be able to adjust and adapt depending on the market needs.
Okay, so let's say I'm convinced that universal automation is great. This sounds like it drastically reduces the time it takes for me to configure PLCs, to set up communication interlocks, but I have a brownfield plant. Like, do I have to rip everything out and go with universal automation, or can I work in tandem with current, let's call it traditional IEC systems and PLCs, DCS, et cetera? Like, what's the interoperability between legacy and current?
Yeah. So, not really related to universal automation, right? But the shared source runtime that they use, one of the main focuses that we're trying to provide with the shared source runtime within EcoStruxure Automation Expert is really having an open protocol kind of support, right? So when we talk about interfacing with other automation vendors and some of these brownfield projects that are there, say you have Siemens or Rockwell or Schneider Electric, right, with Modicon. All of those support various OT protocols like Profinet for Siemens and Ethernet IP for Rockwell and Schneider Electric, or Modbus, for example. This shared source runtime also supports all those protocols, right? So it allows you to have that capability to interface with those pre-existing automation solutions and act as that sort of data aggregator. So we do have a lot of customers that look at EAE also in a data aggregation concept to be able to bring in all the data from those pre-existing systems and then leverage the protocols that we have within the shared source runtime to be able to do some really interesting things from an analytical standpoint, to be able to have some more smart operations into the system.
Okay, that's a fair point. No, I got another question. How does universal automation simplify architectures. So you had mentioned this decoupling, right? I don't need a PLC anymore. But let's give an example like, hey, I'm a pump station and water treatment facility. And traditionally I have telemetry equipment, I have pressures, flow sensors, I got a variable frequency drive to do the pumps. And then I have a standalone PLC or like SCADA pack or some sort of telemetry device aggregating that. Can we simplify the architecture with this? Because it seems, I mean, you mentioned earlier, it could live on a switch, it could live on a drive, it could live on wherever. Like, what does that change and what does that look like moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, you look at some of those customers now, right? If you go into, a pumping station, like a very simple, like mid-sized municipality in the U.S. pumping station, they use some skids from different vendors, right? And they put them together in a very, the end user has no idea really what's going on. They're black boxes, right? So it works great when it's up and running, but if there's any changes they need to make or if something goes wrong, they're really at the kind of mercy of the skid provider, right? To be able to kind of work that out. And usually it turns into a finger pointing game and it's really hard to get kind of an idea about what the challenge is and who's at fault for any sort of issues in the system. So when you talk about simplifying the architecture, right? And instead of having all those kind of, different vendor skids that are not interoperable, right? They're very simplistic in nature and black boxes. Now it gives you the capability to be able to create your own skids essentially, right? And I talk about this with a lot of customers. You can be your own OEM at this point, right? So you can predefine these skids, these assets. You can use them over and over again at your different plants. And it allows you, when you talk about simplifying the architecture, to be able to troubleshoot and see the whole plant vision in one engineering tool and one diagnostics tool, right? Which you haven't been able to do in the past when they have some of these mixed systems that you see a lot, and especially in the water and CPG as well with a lot of the skids that are there. So, while you have a lot of different hardware vendors and everything is the same from a software layer and the same from what the user sees on their side, right? So it's, again, it gives that power to pick the hardware platform that makes the most sense for the customer, but also creating a unified software experience that creates, it takes that complexity of having different hardware platforms out of the equation.
Yeah, so that gets interesting, right? I go to buy a piece of skid equipment and traditionally OEMs do whatever they want. It doesn't matter if it's water, it doesn't matter if it's food and beverage, but it's kind of closed, proprietary. We focus a lot here on this podcast around digital transformation. And one of the issues that a lot of people run into is, hey, I got a piece of skid equipment. The OEM has everything locked out. I can't extract any data out of it. How does this kind of solve that if your manufacturer or your OEM decides to, go down this universal automation path? How does that simplify bringing the device online? How does that simplify the data transfer from that system up to higher level systems?
Yeah. I mean, we would love every OEM provider to go with Automation Expert or using the shared source runtime. It would make, I think, that's the end goal, right? Because, you can essentially have this OEM provider create this skid using, Automation Expert or whatever universal automation vendor that you have there. And then, with the 1499 runtime and this asset-based approach, they create their own asset cat, right? Which essentially encapsulates all the logic that goes along with that skid, which is very, you can connect the logic very easily using a 1499 engineering tool, such as Automation Expert or another one in the market, and make it very easy to see what's going on in the system. So again, you'd have it in the same engineering environment as the rest of your control from your other vendors, but then also you'll be able to see at a diagnostic level very easily to be able to see if anything's going wrong because you have that visibility into that system and that capability with those skids.
Brett, could you speak to the topic of adoption by the systems integrators? Because it seems like, if the trusted advisor is the equipment provider or OEM versus the trusted advisor in many cases being the systems integrator who is putting all this together, they also have to embrace it. And I see a certain conflict where some of this, just again, from the end user's perspective, it sounds like music to, their ears. But from a systems integration perspective, this could actually take away some services, right?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? So from the end user, it's very simple. There's values there. It's something that's really good. When you get to the system integrator kind of conversation, anything that has engineering efficiencies is usually bad for people that are charging for engineering hours, right? Let's make that very clear.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at Automation Expert and you look at kind of this universal automation shared source runtime, it also creates great opportunities for the system integrators as well to adapt and change kind of how they approach their role within the delivery of the industrial automation system to the customer, right? Where I see kind of a evolutionary shift that will happen to the current role of the system integrator into almost a super system integrator, someone that is essentially an expert in the universal automation platforms, right? That are coming from different vendors, providing recommendations between the different hardware platforms, and also being able to create some value added services, right? To talk about some AI integration, some data management solutions, and a lot of this, again, the system is very open and customizable, right? So giving that to the system integrator and giving them the opportunity to create their own, library assets and control assets that can really provide value to the customer, it's just really going to kind of change how a system integrator operates in the market.
I wonder if the topic of, let's say, like in our first episode, we brought up the topic of technical debt. And I think that's an important one in bringing all these different stakeholders together. In fact, a couple of days ago, I came across this article that said that at the IT level, a CIO keeps about 15% of the IT budget to address technical debt. You cannot eliminate technical debt. It's just the nature of the business, right? I mean, if your business is built on mergers and acquisitions, it's inevitable. So if 15% is rule of thumb at the IT level, I keep thinking, oh my gosh, it's a lot higher at the OT level, right?
Probably.
And this at the OT level, the status quo isn't viable. It's not sustainable to be able to manage that level of technical debt, right? So maybe there is a need to just frame the conversation along those lines to help maybe move the systems integrators that may be, not as enthusiastic about this direction.
Yeah, we still see enthusiasm from system integrators because, again, they see opportunity here, right? This doesn't change the fact that, with all these options that customers are going to have, end users are going to have, they need someone to guide them and to be able to help them configure the system and really, provide service contracts and manage all those different vendor devices, right? So I can see a lot of, more involvement in the operational phase from a system integrator than is now because of all those different vendors and needing a single point of contact from the end user in case something goes wrong with one of those hardware platforms, right? So they're all almost like customer service and system integrator at the same time. So this whole concept of a super system integrator is what people call it, to be able to provide that level of service to their customers.
Do you see these super systems integrators then also shifting more to data-related services and more as opposed to just pure technical?
No, 100%, right? And you can see the OT is shifting very heavily towards the IT, paradigm. And the nice thing that we have with this whole 61499 runtime and specifically what I'm handling with Automation Expert is that, you can get a lot of data at the edge now, which is very different than what we've had in the past, right? Where it's very hard to be able to consolidate that data. There might be some advanced tools at L3 with like Aviva and some of these advisors to be able to help you get that data. But with what we're doing now, it makes that data much more readily available and easier to be able to consume and use at those L3 advisor kind of type of things. So yes, I do. I think, when you talk about those system integrators being able to create some really cool things to be able to help manage that data and really provide some operational efficiencies and, sustainability, capabilities in there, I think there's a lot of room for advancement in that area.
Right, Brett. So I think one of the things that, we talked very conceptual, right? But do you have any real world examples where universal automation has been leveraged to solve those issues of operational, of operability, efficiency. Just give me like, what are your thoughts? Like, what's a real life use case that people can wrap their heads around?
Yeah, I talked a lot about some of these high level advantages, right? But not a lot about actual customers that are using this, this universal automation concept to be able to realize some of these, advantages and values. So, we do have a good example with Green. Green is a plastic recycler, a PET chemical recycler. So one of the main things that they were trying to do is really to de-risk their operations and being able to provide a lot of reconfiguration on the fly, and really that scalability concept that I was talking about before. They had a lot of issues with supply chain, and that's something that we wanted to kind of move away from in the future. So they saw universal automation as really the answer to kind of those improvements, right? And they were able to implement the plant, this past year, and what they're seeing right now is reduced engineering costs by 30% for them, and that was just on the first one. So as we go along, there's going to be reduced engineering costs as well, and then reduced testing during development by up to 40%, right? So that's a big one as well too. When you use that asset-based approach with 1499, all those assets are pre-tested. All that unit testing that traditionally you have to do on the automation system goes away. And so that's a big advantage for Green. And that's one example. We have a lot of others. Some are proprietary, some are not. But this isn't just a concept, right? There are customers that are using this in the market and taking advantage of these, different automation vendors in the same, software ecosystem that we have with universal automation.
Now, you said that had an impact to supply chain, but you talked about like engineering. What were they doing? Reconfiguring their assets to meet with market demands, or what was going on there that drove the efficiencies?
Yeah, so I mean, they were trying to build their plants and then scale up their plants, but when they had a proprietary system, there would be times where they'd have to wait 2 years to be able to get a piece of hardware, a PLC or an IO system, right? Which doesn't really align with their speed to market and kind of the market demands that they're trying to capture with a very volatile industry like plastic recycling, right? It's growing very, very quickly and something that they need to scale up very fast. So being able to leverage multiple different hardware vendors to be able to provide the scalability and the capacity increase that they need is really what kind of drove them to that universal automation concept, to give that de-risking of that, additional capacity that they needed.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think everybody lived through that supply chain crisis and not
Yeah.
being able to get hardware. So really having that open automation platform just gives you that ability to go out to anyone that might have something depending on who they are without having to wait for a manufacturer. Yeah, I wanted to put like COVID behind us, but it's a good thing to plan for because I mean, we never know what's going to happen again. And it taught
Yeah.
everybody a lot of lessons.
It's not just COVID, right? I mean, supply chain issues happen all the time, and Schneider was no different, right? We had some very big challenges that we are trying to face during the COVID times, and you never know what's going to happen in the future, right? So just having that flexibility at the hardware vendor aspect will be invaluable for customers when they need to adapt to market changes, and that's a big one I think that a lot of customers are looking at with universal automation.
All right, Brett. So that's an interesting use case. Now we talked interoperability and agnostic architectures, right? You can bring other thing in. Was this 100% Schneider Electric, like product, software, and solutions? Or is this truly like an open pursuit that you went in?
With Green, their goal is to be as vendor agnostic as possible, right? Because they were trying to de-risk themselves from a supply chain aspect. So they went probably on the extreme end, right, to get as many vendors in there as possible to be able to show that interoperability and then that kind of vendor agnostic solution. So Schneider was just one part, right? So you had the Altivar drives from Schneider Electric with our DPAC controllers. So essentially, it's a card that goes into the Ultimar variable speed drive to be able to allow some control at the edge with the drive itself. So it's something very innovative with what Schneider does. But then they also had third-party HMIs, third-party IPCs, and Stall was used for the IO layer as well. I believe so, and they might have done the IPCs as well. But so again, it's essentially bringing in multiple hardware vendors to be able to create a single universal automation solution to the customer to de-risk that supply chain and hardware availability challenges that they've faced in the past.
Now you had mentioned that, Schneider helps customers with this. How did Schneider Electric do the implementation? Did the customer do it? Was there a third party integrator in between? What did the implementation look? Because again, this is new. People might be unfamiliar. How did that come about?
Yeah. So obviously we provide a lot of support to customers, and we helped with the configuration of the Ultivar drives, which were our hardware platform, our device that we were using. But um, we Universal Automation takes the lead on this, right? So we are a automation vendor. It was not led by us to be able to put this together. Universal Automation took the lead on this within their organization to be able to help the customer, decide on the hardware platforms that made the most sense for them within the vendors and the different members that they have within the Universal Automation organization. So, again, they're a very separate organization that can help guide the user as to what makes the most sense for them and the different offerings that are within Universal Automation. Schneider Electric is just one part of that.
My gears are turning in my head, right? Like listening to you talking about this, and I can't get around the decoupling the hardware from the software aspect. And if I look at any of the big manufacturers, Schneider Electric, Siemens, Rockwell, like why would they want to do that? Because to me, it almost commoditizes the hardware and then forces them to like show their value on, hey, are you going to buy my stuff? Because traditionally I buy PLC, I get all this IO with it. Like why would any manufacturer want to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It's a scary concept. And, when I first came on board, when we started to work with Universal Automation, it is frightening. I think with Schneider Electric, right, we are not a tier one player in the industrial automation space, right? We are a tier two, maybe tier three considering, right? So we have to do some drastic moves to be able to help capture market share and make our way to be that tier one player. So we see ourselves as being a very good software company and a software provider, right? So we are okay with the risks of moving away from the hardware sales, right? And we want the customers to be able to pick hardware that best fits their needs. And if Schneider Electric is not the hardware provider that does that, we're okay with that, right? Because we think we're going to be strong enough on the software side to be able to provide that engineering environment and those capabilities that are really, and the service capabilities to really drive that market. But you can see kind of the people that are in Universal Automation, right? This is a direct attack against those tier one automation providers, right? They've created these proprietary systems that are being consumed and very successful in the market and kind of holding on to that status quo as much as possible where, they have more to lose on this than a tier two or a tier three player. That's why we're seeing a lot more involvement in some of the challengers in the market for industrial automation, for Universal Automation than some of these established market leaders.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of value at the end user, right? So it seems like this approach is all end user value, and it almost forces manufacturers to provide best in class. And if you don't, like there's a whole market out there of people that will, niche players, whatever. So if a vendor doesn't make something like, hey, I need intrinsically safe IO, and they don't make that, I no longer am like stuck with one platform, right? I can do whatever I want.
There's a lot of times where vendors, it doesn't make sense for them to invest in kind of niche hardware offerings, right? But there are a lot of smaller players out there in the market that, have some very good expertise in those areas, like intrinsically safe IO is an example, right? And, maybe high performance motion and some of these kind of niche things, this helps Schneider to kind of broaden its portfolio and the Universal Automation members when they don't have something that could be holding them back, right? So if we have a project come in that, needs intrinsically safe IO, we don't have it in our portfolio, but now we can say that, we can partner with another organization and Universal Automation to be able to create a still fully integrated solution, but using two different vendors to be able to accomplish that need.
Okay. Now, I mean, we touched the legacy system, so it seems like there's a place to play on both of those. Like, where do you see, I know this is pretty new just from being at Schneider, like 2-3 years into the marketplace, but where do you see Universal Automation evolving? Like what use cases are good to do it? What's still in the works? And should this be part of my 5-10 year vision for, my factory of the future?
I think it really depends on the complexity of your system, right? I think as you go into a more complex plant environment or even multi-plant environment, right? That's where universal automation makes more and more sense. For example, we have a customer in the Nordics. I'm not going to say the name, but one of their biggest challenges is that they have a bunch of these lines, packaging lines and different things that there's so many automation needs for them going on at the same time that they don't have an automation vendor that can service all of their needs at the single time. So they have to go with multiple vendors for each of these lines, and it creates this whole nightmare of configuration and interoperability challenges between those lines. And this is a perfect solution for that customer, right? To say that now you can go with other vendors, right? And create it all under that single software layer to be able to natively have that interoperability between systems. If you're a small, customer that has one PLC, this might not be the right way for you to go. There are other values there, right? To be able to have that reusability of the asset-based approach in case you want to repeat that one machine PLC solution over and over again. So there are things there, but when you talk about universal automation, that vendor agnostic approach, the values increase as the system complexity increases.
Brett, can you help tie this to the topic of AI at scale? Because there's so much hinging on the future success of AI. But on the industrial automation side, AI at scale is daunting. And also because to scale that, you also have to have good data governance, data discipline, harmonization. And how does that, what are your thoughts on, tying it to that big, the change agent or the driver of change?
Yeah. I mean, it's, when you talk AI at scale, right, it's data availability and then data consistency, right? If you have both of those things, you'll be able to do whatever you want to do with an AI engine and generative AI capabilities. So, what this does with this shared source runtime is gives you that standardization of data, right? And for our eco runtime that we have within Schneider Electric and what the shared source runtime has as well, we have MQTT capabilities. We are going to have DNS and HTTPS capabilities to be able to share that data from the edge, right? So you have, you can have these small little PLCs that you have, in the remote locations that are able to share data at the source to an MQTT broker somewhere to be able to standardize and aggregate that data to an AI engine that can improve optimization across your entire plant. So, having that data at the edge, having that interoperability between the different IT and OT protocols that you have gives you a lot of flexibility to get that AI at scale for your system.
I think the other part, what about like running AI at the edge? Because traditionally we're running a lot of algorithms. They could be in the cloud, but let's say I want to do like vision systems in a high-speed bottling line, and I can't rely on cloud connectivity to be able to trigger a high-speed like reject of a sample. Like, does this help for running like AI edge applications and then being able to respond quickly?
Yeah, there's multiple ways of looking at it, right? You can have, for example, we have an integration with Cognex right now to be able to have this predefined asset cat, so very plug and play on your system to be able to leverage some smart vision capabilities from Cognex at the edge down into your system. So that's a predefined piece of hardware from Cognex that does that. But also when you talk about AI at the edge, right, having that hardware agnostic approach, being able to run that shared source runtime on an IPC or a piece of hardware that has a little bit more horsepower to be able to handle some of those AI engines, you can do that now at the edge, right? You can have an AI data model interfacing with the runtime core at the edge, being able to provide feedback to that specific pump right there with no latency, no issues, and giving you a lot of flexibility to be able to drive that, right? So, and again, it's all about flexibility. If you want to run AI in a centralized location to provide details, if you want to run at the edge, again, just gives the customer kind of the capability to do whatever they want.
Interesting. Okay. So yeah, one of the other questions that I wanted to get is, I did a little homework and research, and it seems like EAE is event driven versus traditional PLCs that, scan every logic and compare in real time. So what what's the pros, cons, like why event driven versus traditional PLC, and what does that mean for our systems and the way they operate?
So there's a lot of advantages with event-based control, right? And the first one is that application agnostic capability. So if you're tied to this cycle of the PLC, then you can't move that data around, move that control logic around on the fly, right? So this is where the event-based underlying has advantages over the cyclic. But when you also talk about event-based, right, inherently it's going to be faster, right? Because you're running off of a event chain, not off of a controller cycle. So when you're running a 500 millisecond cycle from more of a process world, there's a lot of dead time between the control, and there's a lot of control running when it doesn't need to, right? And that's another thing that event-based really brings, is that optimization of the CPU load for the different pieces of the hardware, because you're only running control logic when it needs to be run, instead of running everything 500 milliseconds or 100 milliseconds or whatever it needs to be during that time. So that's an advantage as well, right? It's just reducing the CPU load on the piece of hardware and creating some more sustainability there. And then, when you talk about IT and OT convergence, right? Every automation vendor talks about this as something that they're trying to move towards and be able to create, better efficiencies between the systems. Cyclic systems and IT systems don't work well together because IT systems are event-based. That's a fact, right? So having this cyclic approach to interfacing with event-based is very challenging to be able to do. We've seen a lot of cases of this, and we have competitors in this market with CodeAssist and some other providers as well that have faced a lot of challenges in integrating the IT level, for example, Portainer, container management, and some of these advanced IT tools with their systems. Whereas with Automation Expert and, Universal Automation with their Source runtime with 1499, event to event is much easier to be able to consume and be able to interface with each other. So those are kind of some of the main reasons, that IT-OT kind of convergence, CPU reduction, and just that movability and of the control, separating it from the hardware.
So now, I'm getting all this. I want to go back to something that you said before, that if you're a large scale manufacturer, like more ideal candidate. It seems like if I'm a large industrial manufacturer and I bring in different, let's quote unquote, black boxes, I now have to staff all of those different expertise on my hands. So if I have brand A PLC versus brand B versus drives versus skid equipment with who knows what, I have to then invest in training in all those different systems and then know how all that stuff ties together. So you're saying we standardize on universal automation platform, and that siloed expertise training, the ability to upskill my workforce, is substantially impacted?
Yeah, right. I mean, imagine having 4 different engineering softwares that you have to train your engineers on, right? And to hire them, and it gets very complicated very fast. So while we, are still using different hardware platforms, the fact that we have a single engineering environment to be able to drive the configuration of those devices is very priceless as you go more complex into your systems. And that's what I was talking about before. The more complex the system, the more savings that you'll be able to get from that, to be able to just train your employees on a single engineering environment for the system. So yeah, there's definitely savings there. And I think what we're doing with EcoStruxure Automation Expert too is a much more IT focused approach. And one of the main things that we're seeing in the market, which I think is going to be very interesting to a lot of people in the next 10 years or even 5 years, is that, a lot of people are going to be retiring here that have a lot of OT knowledge, right? They're used to ladder logic programming. They're used to a lot of these kind of electrical focused programming languages that, if you look at universities today, are not being taught, right? It's all IT focused. It's all IT language. So you're going to see a workforce change in the next short-term future here, where we're going to have a lack of knowledge in some of these, electrical focused protocol configurations, and more of an adaptation towards IT focused, where Automation Expert fits a lot better there than some of the legacy offers that we have in the market. So it's giving you, not only saving you training and then, efficiencies at your workforce level, but also providing you a better talent pool of people to be able to pick from, to be able to, build your workforce and future-proof you, down the road.
Now, what about the pushback on, okay, I've done a lot of work with, PLC people, and a lot of times they program in ladder logic because that's how they're able to follow and troubleshoot circuitry. So are we saying that we can't rely on any type of IEC, traditional languages such as ladder logic, function block now, or is there a way to do the best of both worlds? Maybe I have an electrical system where it's almost a non-starter because of my older workforce that says this is the only way they know how to do their job. Like, is there a common ground, some hybrid approach? Like, how does that look?
Yeah, so a bit outside of universal automation, but there are challenges moving from 1131 to 1499. Let's be very frank, right? So I always tell customers that there is an upfront learning cost here, right? An upfront engineering cost to be able to recreate your IP, your kind of control logic in 1499. Once that upfront engineering cost is done, it's essentially a reuse and repeat and reusability, copy and paste, to being able to do with your own personalized library, asset library that you created, right? But there is that upfront cost. And we see that within Schneider Electric, right? We see a lot of hesitancy just because there's a lot of people that are familiar with, 1131 and ladder logic and all these things. So we are going to create some ways to be able to mitigate that. So one of the new things that we're working on is this concept of an open adapter. This open adapter will be able to link 1499 to 1499 solutions, but also 1131 to 1499 solutions. So if you had a customer that, was really stuck on, some of their pre-existing control assets, or maybe wanted a little bit more time to be able to recreate some of their IP and logic in 1499 to be able to provide that, that stepping stone into that 1499 event-based control. But we've tried conversions, right, from 1131 to 1499. It doesn't work, right? It's a totally different paradigm. It's a totally different way to configure your control. The only way to really do it is to sit down and recreate your logic in an asset-based approach, and then reap the benefits of that asset-based reusability on your system, for the future forever.
So would you feel that's like the biggest hesitation to customers wanting to move forward with this is really that kind of abandoning what they did or learning something new? Like, what's the big stumbling block? Because again, I see tremendous value for the end user. Is it maturity of product? Is it maturity of people that are into that ecosystem? Like, what do you feel are those big hesitation factors?
Yeah, I think it's change, right? This is a lot of change coming at once, right? Especially in an industry that's been very stagnant. I would guess over the past 30 years, right? There hasn't been a lot of major revolution in the industrial automation market. So that's always challenging, especially when you have people that have been configuring the same way for the past 30, 40 years, right? They're used to one thing, they do it very well. When you talk to system integrators, right, they have a lot of pre-established processes built around 1131, right? So for them, it's all about the bottom line. It doesn't make sense for them to move forward and kind of take that leap into 1499 until an end user tells them that they need to do it, right? So then it goes kind of back to the end users need to be in the power seat here and really push for some of these values and what this open EcoStruxure and this universal automation runtime brings to them, because there's hesitancies at the other layers of the delivery system that we need to kind of solve. So yeah, it's a learning curve. It's familiarity with the processes. The one nice thing we do have with Schneider Electric is we do dedicate a lot of resources internally. We call it the Center of Excellence within the EAE team to really handhold customers on their first project with EAE, which is something that we know is needed. And we want customers to ask us for that and to work with them on that point so that we can really ensure that they're leveraging 1499 the best way, creating that really optimized library for their assets and their system so that when they do the second project, they really are amazed in how EAE can really help them from a engineering cost standpoint, operations efficiency standpoint, and everything that goes along with the universal automation runtime.
See, that resonates with me because what I'm hearing is a common theme. It's not that customers aren't, when I look at adoption, it's not so much, fear of what this future looks like. It's more about help me de-risk the transition, right? And, the extra hand holding that that needs to occur to get customers. Because again, I think it's, a fear of change is just the disruption if I don't get it right.
Yeah.
Right.
And one of the ways we try to mitigate that, right, is, this whole asset-based approach. We have predefined assets from Schneider Electric that are there to help the users through this transitionary period and this learning curve with 1499, right? So we have segment-specific libraries, common libraries with things like pumps and valves and these things that can be customized very easily to meet specific customers' needs. So, being able to leverage these free libraries and these free assets does help that learning curve a bit and helps customer kind of jumpstart their asset creation on their side.
So what do you feel is like one big misconception that people see about universal automation in the field that you might want to address?
Yeah, I think I mentioned in the beginning is that Schneider Electric does not own universal automation, right? We are a member and a technology provider. And in the future, we're going to step back as that technology provider once UA becomes self-sustained and being able to take over the development of that shared source runtime. So that's really one of the main things that people don't understand. This is a totally different organization that has very little ties to what we're doing with EcoStruxure Automation Expert that I'm driving within Schneider Electric. And then again, like we get a lot of comparisons to Foundation Field Bus and some of these shared standards between vendors, right? Which is not a right comparison, right? We've seen the mistakes that those shared standards and organizations have tried to drive in the past and the challenges they've had with specific implementation strategies and it just created a mess between the different vendors when they went through it. But being able to provide this open source solution, this shared runtime, really we're hoping that is going to create, bypass some of those implementation challenges that we face with the vendors and really create a very seamless, open, interoperable runtime and environment to be able to help these vendors really create that first in the market interoperable solution across different vendors.
Yeah, so I think in the past it's been more protocol standardization, but this is definitely not a protocol, right?
No.
So it's not like OPC UA it has the ability to communicate with all that fun stuff, but it's not another protocol that the industry is trying to standardize around.
Yeah, no, we face challenges all the time with, for example, Profinet. We have support in our runtime for Profinet, and Siemens does it in a little different way. And it's for some IO it works, for some IO it doesn't work. Same thing with Ethernet IP with Rockwell. So, those are the type of things that we're trying to remove, right? We don't want the user to have to face these little tiny errors that they're facing with protocol integration between the different vendors. We want to create a system that is seamless and that doesn't run the risk of having some of those, challenges from an operational standpoint.
So going into, I guess we're getting close on time here, so getting close to wrap up, but going back to the Schneider Electric side of the fence, since you're a part of how Schneider is addressing, this universal automation standard, what do you feel is the most exciting development that Schneider Electric is working on within this, product family in the near future?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot here. I think we have a lot of exciting things coming down the roadmap. I think for me, I could talk about AI and the integration with AI that we're trying to do. And, we have some things from a conversational help standpoint to really help with that learning curve that we talked about a bit to help drive people through some of that, asset, creation and the learning curve with 1499. So that will help. We're also looking at application generation, looking at AI, using AI to be able to take your P&ID drawings and some of these technical documents that you have and create your 1499 assets from those documents. So really that whole automated engineering concept, which is something that I think is really important and really leading towards that fully autonomous plant that a lot of customers are trying to get to, right? Where they have zero user interaction from the engineering phase all the way through the operation as well. So AI is going to play a big part, but we also have this concept called EcoStruxure Automation Expert Platform. It is our web-based, ecosystem for our different offers within Schneider Electric, where EcoStruxure Automation Expert, the engineering environment will be a big part of that. So we're looking at, changing our engineering environment to a web-based system, but also integrating a lot of other of the very valuable software suites from Schneider Electric into this, web-based ecosystem of capabilities. So I think between those two things, it's a kind of a bright future on what we're trying to do. And it's going to provide a lot of value to users in this industrial automation space.
The ability to use generative AI to generate source code is definitely something that I'm interested in playing a part in, or learning more about. I mean, that kind of revolutionizes.
Yeah, let's go to Hanover Mess. We'll have a demo of it there.
Oh, I wish they would send me to Germany, but I don't think that's going to happen. So I'll just have to call you back and you can fill me in on the viability of the product.
Yeah. I guess one thing that we didn't really talk about is the integration that we have with Aviva, right? I think that's a big one. We're focused on universal automation, and it's more EcoStruxure Automation Expert focus. But when you talk about that whole automated and engineering savings, that Aviva integration is a big part.
Yeah. So what does that integration look like? Now, you had mentioned taking stuff from P&IDs, and Aviva has some products that allow you to digitize that. Like, is that integration looking around that, or is it more the traditional SCADA wonderware layer? Like, what components to Aviva are you foreseeing this integration coming into play?
It's on both sides, and we currently have it, right? So this is where we have customers that can either take, the Aviva engineering software suite, create their DXP file to be able to, encapsulate those documents into electronic forms, or customers can use a standard, paper P&ID, and we have an advanced, analytical tool to be able to analyze that from an object recognition standpoint, to be able to automatically create your assets and your HMI in your system. So, say you have a pump on a P&ID, it's going to recognize that, it's going to assign it to a template that you have built in the automation system. And then it's going to instantiate that within your automation logic within 1499. And part of that CAD is also going to contain the HMI logic as well. So you're essentially going from a P&ID drawing or a Aviva DXP file from the Aviva engineering suite and creating not only your control, but also your HMI and Aviva OMI as well with ASP. So it goes through the whole life cycle. So all that engineering that you had manually down at the engineering suite for the L2 with the control, and then also the HMI configuration with Aviva, that all is done automatically now.
Well, so that's a big value from lifecycle management. If I build something new, I get it designed, I could have my control logic up and running within no time at all, it seems like.
Correct. Yeah,
that's pretty exciting.
Well, Brett, if we aren't already planning on having a session at Aviva World, let's work on that.
I think we are, but yeah, we'll be in talks on that.
Awesome. Well, Sri, any last questions for Brett, or any last statement, Brett, you want to make for the audience, where they can learn more about it? Any closing remarks?
I think if people want more information, right, universalautomation.org is a good place to really see what universal automation is trying to drive to. But also, if you go to Schneider Electric's website, to learn more about our implementation of the shared source runtime with universal automation, EcoStruxure Automation Expert will be able to provide you with that. And I would just say that, again, I want to enforce that this is up to the end users, right? We're taking a leap of faith here by being able to share this shared source runtime and being able to create this open source kind of concept. But it's not going to be successful if we don't get the end users behind it to be able to push this as a prescription in the market for the vendors, right? So that's where we really need to get to. This is all focused on values for the end users. So it's really up to them to be able to drive this forward.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've heard a lot of end users kind of pushing for more open source content. So it seems like here's your answer to that, at least on this traditionally locked and slow moving OT space. So I definitely appreciate your insights and spending the afternoon with us. A lot of good information here. I learned a lot. I know Sri did as well. So with that, we'll kind of conclude here. And I just want to thank everyone for tuning in to this episode of Practitioners Unplugged. We hope you found these stories and insights as inspiring and informative as we did. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, share the podcast with your network. Until next time, keep innovating, keep transforming. Have a nice day. Take care. Bye.